Hello everyone, and welcome to my General Hospital official channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up.
General Hospital recap for Monday, November 10th, reveals that Drew Cain walked away during Ned Quartermain's heart attack while Willow Tate got some possible release news. At GH, Felicia Scorpio found Portia Robinson in her office with Isaiah Gannon. Felicia brought up the night of Drew's shooting and acted like she was looking into Willow's whereabouts for her attorney. That gave Felicia a chance to ask if Portia had seen Willow and fish for info about Portia's alibi. Portia claimed she was on call in her office at the time, but Felicia checked the log in the computer later and saw that Portia actually went off call at 8 p.m. Back with Isaiah, he wondered if they should clear things up with the cops since Portia was actually with him that night, but she was adamant about keeping their romantic entanglement private. At Sonny Corinthos' place, he hinted about pointing Alexis Davis toward a new suspect and tried to convince Michael Corinthos that this whole thing would go away if Willow was found not guilty. Michael still didn't want Willow in the kids' lives considering what she was capable of. After a quick chat with Donna Corinthos, Michael took off. Later, ADA Justine Turner showed up at Sonny's door looking dirty after failing to change a tire. Sonny made a phone call to handle the car crisis and shared a charged moment with Justine as he wiped the smudge off her face. Donna was also there to offer up a plate of cookies, so Justine had one and traded smiles with Sonny. At Pentonville, Harrison Chase visited Willow with a pic of Amelia Corinthos drawing on his phone. Willow admired the drawing and took Chase's hand gratefully, but Alexis Davis warned against the physical contact when she arrived. Alexis had some updates on Willow's case since she'd arranged for Willow to have another bail hearing, which wouldn't be connected to Nina Reeves. This left Alexis more hopeful about scoring Willow's release. Chase also confessed that he'd been investigating on his own and hoped to prove Jacinda Bracken was with another client that night to make Michael's alibi fall apart. Later, Felicia called Alexis to spill that Portia was lying about her whereabouts the night of Drew's shooting. At the Quartermain mansion, Brooklyn Quartermain voiced concerns to Dante Falconeri about Chase trying to help Willow and potentially losing his job over it. Dante eventually acknowledged that Chase had been to see Willow 3 times since she was hauled off to prison. Once Chase came home, he faced Brooklyn's interrogation about his efforts to free Willow. At Crimson, Drew bickered with Jacinda before Nina pulled him into her office alone. Although Drew wanted Jacinda gone, Nina suggested that her sticking around would work out since Michael couldn't publicly have an escort around his children. After Nina hinted about forcing Michael to deny the relationship, she suggested his alibi would crumble. Once Drew exited, Nina had Jacinda summon Michael, who agreed when Nina pushed for some time with her grandchildren. Michael just made it clear that Nina couldn't overstep when it came to talking about Willow. On Michael's way out, he made dinner plans with Jacinda and kissed her as Nina peeked at them through her ajar door. At Bobby's, Giovanni Gio Palmieri gave Emma Scorpio Drake a pep talk about their lab break-in plot. Soon after, Ned joined Gio and caught up with him as he ate a meal. There were moments when Ned seemed like he was in some pain and struggling to breathe, but he kept a smile on his face. After Ned stepped outside, he fumed over the phone since the movers took the boxes from Lulu Spencer's place to another address instead of the Quartermain mansion as planned. Drew came along and assured Ned that the boxes weren't lost, those precious Quartermain family heirlooms were at his house now. Ned flew off the handle and hurled threats at Drew, which led to his apparent health crisis getting worse. Drew assumed Ned was faking a heart attack and walked off, so Ned ultimately collapsed on the ground alone. General Hospital spoilers say Ned will need medical attention right away once he's found, so stay tuned. The air in the hospital waiting room was thick with the scent of antiseptic and stale coffee, a cloying perfume of anxiety that clung to the back of the throat. It was a space designed for the liminal hours of human experience, for the suspended animation between bad news and worse, or the fragile hope of a reprieve. For Drew Cain, it had become a prison, its walls closing in with every silent, agonizing minute that ticked by from the wall-mounted clock. The frantic, blurry rush of getting Ned Quartermain here, the crumpled form on the green at the country club, the panicked shouts, the scream of the ambulance, had now decayed into this interminable, silent vigil. And it was in this silence that the cracks in his own composure began to widen into chasms. He could see the tableau of grief and fear reflected in the faces around him. Brooklyn, Ned's daughter, paced a short, worn path in the industrial carpet, her phone clutched in a white-knuckled grip, as if it could transmit her willpower through its silent screen. Olivia Quartermain, Ned's wife, sat statue still, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap that the knuckles were a bloodless white. Her gaze was fixed on the double doors leading to the surgical suites, a tunnel vision of dread. And then there was Lois, his Lois, a presence that both anchored him and amplified his every turbulent emotion. She sat beside him, her hand a gentle, steady pressure on his forearm, but he could feel the tremor in her touch, the shared terror that vibrated between them. This was his fault. The sentence was a drumbeat in his skull, syncopated with the rhythm of his own racing heart. It wasn't a rational thought, not really. Ned's heart attack was a medical event, a time bomb of genetics and stress that had finally detonated. But rationality had no place in the emotional maelstrom Drew was weathering. He had pushed Ned. He had engaged in a bitter, public confrontation over the future of ELQ, the Quartermain corporate empire that was both their legacy and their battlefield. He had wanted to secure a future for his son, Scout, to claim the birthright he felt had been denied to him for so long. He had been so focused on the fight, on winning, that he hadn't seen the pallor creeping into Ned's face, the sheen of cold sweat on his brow. He replayed the moment in his mind, a cruel, slow-motion instant on a loop. Ned's face, contorted not just in anger but in something else, something pained and desperate. His hand going to his chest. The sharp, startled intake of breath that was more a gasp than a word. And what had Drew done? He had stood his ground, his own argument still poised on his lips, thinking it was a theatrical ploy, a trick to gain sympathy. It was only when Ned's legs buckled, when he collapsed onto the meticulously manicured grass, that the horrifying truth had crashed over Drew. The victory he had been so desperately seeking had turned to ashes in his mouth, bitter and suffocating. A doctor in blue scrubs finally emerged, his face a carefully neutral mask that sent a fresh wave of cold fear through the room. The family converged on him, a single, multi-headed entity of apprehension. Drew hung back, his feet rooted to the spot, feeling like an intruder in this intimate circle of familial terror. He heard the words, critical but stable, bypass the worst of the blockage, induced coma to reduce strain, the next 24 hours are crucial. They were clinical phrases, meant to inform, but they did little to soothe the raw, gut-wrenching guilt that was eating him alive. He saw Olivia sway with relief, Brooklyn sag against a chair, and Lois turn to him, her eyes filled with tears that were a mixture of fear and hope. He's going to be okay, Drew. He's a fighter. But Drew couldn't meet her gaze. He could only see Ned, lifeless on the grass, and his own shadow falling over him. The walls of the waiting room seemed to pulse, the air becoming too thin to breathe. He needed out. He needed to escape the suffocating weight of his own culpability, the pitying looks, the unspoken accusation he was leveling at himself. I need some air, he muttered, the words sounding choked and foreign to his own ears. Lois's face clouded with confusion. Drew? Honey, wait. The doctor just said. I just need a minute, he insisted, pulling his arm from her gentle grasp. He couldn't explain it, this primal need for flight. It wasn't logical. A good man, a responsible man, would stay. He would support his family, he would be a rock. But the memory of his other life, the one as Jason Morgan, the enforcer who could compartmentalize any emotion, any trauma, surged to the forefront. That man knew how to walk away from a scene. That man knew how to bury feeling under a mountain of cold necessity. Without another word, he turned and strode away, leaving a stunned silence in his wake. He didn't look back. He couldn't. He pushed through the hospital's main doors and the humid Port Charles air hit him like a physical blow, a stark contrast to the sterile, climate-controlled environment he had fled. He walked, his pace quick and aimless, the sounds of the city, the blare of car horns, the distant wail of a siren, the chatter of pedestrians, a meaningless cacophony against the roaring in his mind. He was running, plain and simple. Running from the consequences, running from the fear, running from the horrifying realization that in his quest to be a provider, a pillar, he might have destroyed a part of his own family. The newsroom of the invader was its own special kind of chaos, a controlled frenzy of ringing phones, clacking keyboards, and the low, constant hum of breaking news. It was a world of deadlines and exclusives, where human tragedy was often distilled into catchy headlines and column inches. At the epicenter of this particular storm was Harrison Chase, a man whose moral compass had been severely tested since taking over the tabloid in an attempt to steer it toward a semblance of integrity. The scanner on his desk, usually a source of background noise, had just crackled to life with a transmission that made the blood drain from his face. It was a police dispatch, a routine notification to be on the lookout for a transport vehicle from Pentonville. The name of the prisoner being transferred for a pre-release medical evaluation was the one that sent a jolt of ice through his veins, Willow Tate. For a moment, Chase simply froze, the words from the scanner echoing in the sudden, silent void of his concentration. Willow. The woman he had once loved, the woman whose heart he had broken, the woman whose life had become entangled in a web of illness, betrayal, and ultimately, a desperate act of violence that had landed her in prison. He had followed her trial, a silent, agonized observer. He knew the whole sordid story, her leukemia, the revelation that her mother was the hated Harmony, her marriage to Michael Corinthos under the shadow of her illness, and finally, the confrontation with her biological mother that had ended with Harmony's death. It had been ruled self-defense, but the trauma and the complex circumstances had led to a prison sentence. And now, she was being released. The reasons for her early release were a mystery the scanner didn't solve. Compassionate leave? A legal technicality? A deal brokered by the formidable power of the Corinthos family? It didn't matter. The only thing that mattered was that Willow, the gentle, kind-hearted woman he had once envisioned a future with, was getting out. And she was getting out today. His reporter's instincts, usually so sharp and decisive, warred with the tangled mess of his personal history. This was a major story. The release of Willow Corinthos, daughter-in-law of the city's most powerful and notorious figure, was front-page news. He had a responsibility to the paper, to the story. But the thought of reducing Willow's freedom to a sensational headline, of having a photographer shove a lens in her face the moment she took her first breath of free air, made his stomach turn. He thought of Michael, a man he considered a friend, despite their complicated past. He thought of the children, Wiley and the new baby, who had been growing up without their mother. This wasn't just a story, it was a family on the precipice of being made whole again. To treat it as a scoop felt like a profound violation. "Jessica," he barked, his voice sharper than he intended. A young, eager reporter scurried over, her digital recorder already in hand. "I just got a tip. Big one. Willow Corinthos is being released from Pentonville today. Medical transfer vehicle, probably headed to General Hospital for final processing." Jessica's eyes widened, the gleam of a career-making byline already shining in them. "On it, boss. I'll get a team to the hospital and to the prison gates. We'll have live updates on the website in 20 minutes. "No," Chase said, the word coming out with a finality that surprised even him. Jessica blinked. "No? But, Chase, this is huge. The Chronicle will have it by afternoon if we don't move now." "I said no," Chase repeated, standing up, his frame imposing behind the desk. "This is off the record. We are not running this story. Not yet. I'll handle it personally." "But the public's right to know," she started, her journalistic training kicking in. "This isn't about the public's right to know," Chase interrupted, his voice low and firm. "This is about a sick woman and her family. We are not going to be the vultures circling her on the worst day of her life. Or the best. I don't know which it is, and I'm not going to be the one to make it worse. Understood?" The reporter looked stunned, then slightly chastised. She nodded slowly and retreated. Chase sank back into his chair, running a hand over his face. He had just potentially jeopardized his paper's biggest scoop in weeks. He had made a decision based on emotion, on loyalty, on the ghost of a love that had long since faded but whose respect remained. He picked up his phone, his thumb hovering over Michael's contact. A warning. They deserved that much. But he hesitated. Was that crossing another line? The ethical tightrope he walked every day had just become a razor's edge. The world outside the hospital was a blur of concrete and noise, but it offered no solace to Drew. His walk had taken him to the waterfront, where the gray, churning water of the harbor mirrored the turmoil inside him. He leaned against a cold metal railing, watching the gulls wheel and cry overhead, their screams a fitting soundtrack to his internal chaos. He had tried so hard to build a life defined by its opposite. After the hell of his imprisonment, the psychological torment of having his identity stripped and replaced, he had clung to the idea of family, of legacy, of being a good man. Not a hired gun, not a pawn in someone else's war, but a father, a partner, a quartermain. And now, in his first real test, in his first significant power struggle within that very family, he had potentially destroyed a part of it. He had become the thing he despised, a source of conflict, of pain, of near death. His phone buzzed incessantly in his pocket. Lois. He knew it was her. He could picture the worry etched on her beautiful face, the confusion at his abrupt departure. Each vibration was an accusation. Where are you? How could you leave? He silenced it, the act feeling both cowardly and necessary. He needed the space to think, to breathe, to find the man he was supposed to be beneath the rubble of his own actions. His feet, seemingly of their own volition, carried him toward the metro court. It wasn't a conscious decision, but a gravitational pull toward the one person in this city who understood the unique hell of a fractured identity, who knew what it was to have your past be a ghost that haunted your present. Carly Corinthos. He found her in her office, a sanctuary of modern elegance and sharp business acumen. She was on the phone, her voice a low, commanding murmur, but she hung up the moment she saw him in the doorway. Her sharp eyes took him in instantly, the disheveled hair, the haunted look in his eyes, the tension in his shoulders. Drew? What's wrong? She asked, rising from her chair. Is it Scout? No, Scout's fine, he said, his voice rough. It's Ned. He had a heart attack. At the club. During our argument. Carly's hand flew to her mouth. Oh, my God. Drew. Is he? He's alive. In a coma. Critical but stable. The words came out in a rote, monotone list. The doctors say the next day is crucial. The relief on Carly's face was brief, immediately replaced by a deeper, more knowing concern. She came around the desk, her presence as solid and unwavering as the bedrock of the city. Okay, that's something. So why are you here? Why aren't you at the hospital with your family? And it all came pouring out. The pressure he'd been under, the fight for ELQ, the bitter words exchanged, the moment Ned clutched his chest, the horrifying realization, the suffocating guilt in the waiting room, the overwhelming need to escape. He didn't try to pretty it up or make excuses. He laid his failure bare before her. Carly listened, not with judgment, but with a fierce, unwavering empathy. When he finished, she didn't offer empty platitudes. You think you're the first person to have a fight and have something terrible happen? Drew, this is not your fault. Ned's health is Ned's health. You can't control that. I pushed him, Carly, he insisted, the image seared into his mind. I saw he was getting agitated, and I kept pushing. For Scout, for my future, for some idea of justice. I was so consumed with winning that I didn't see I was battling a man who was already at his breaking point. Listen to me, Carly said, her voice firm. You are a good man. You have spent years trying to do the right thing, to build a stable life after everything you've been through. One argument, no matter how heated, does not erase that. Running away from the hospital? Maybe it wasn't your finest moment. But feeling so much guilt that you can't breathe? That just proves you have a conscience. The Drew Kane I know doesn't run from a fight. He's just regrouping. Her words were a lifeline, thrown to a drowning man. She wasn't absolving him, but she was reframing his panic, making it seem human rather than monstrous. She was reminding him of who he was, something he had lost sight of in the sterile, terrifying environment of the hospital. They all must hate me, he murmured, finally voicing his deepest fear. They're scared, Carly corrected gently. They're terrified for Ned. They aren't sitting there plotting against you, Drew. They're a family in crisis. And families in crisis need all their members. Even the ones who make mistakes. She was right. He knew she was right. The frantic, flight-or-fight response that had taken over his body began to recede, replaced by a cold, clear sense of shame. He had left Lois to face that nightmare alone. He had left Brooklyn and Olivia. However he felt, however guilty he was, his place was there, with them. Supporting them. Facing the consequences, whatever they may be. I have to go back, he said, the decision solidifying within him. Carly gave a single, sharp nod. Yes, you do. And you face it. All of it. You're Drew Kane. You've survived far worse than a family argument. He left the Metro Court with a different kind of weight on his shoulders. It was no longer the crushing burden of pure guilt, but the heavier, more responsible weight of duty. He had to go back, apologize, and stand by his family. He had to face the music, no matter how discordant it might be. The medical wing of the Port Charles Police Department was a bleak, utilitarian space, all flickering fluorescent lights and scuffed linoleum floors. It was here that Willow Corinthos found herself sitting on the edge of a stiff examination table, a female officer standing silently by the door. The final signature had been scrawled, the last piece of paperwork processed. The plain clothes she had been given felt strange and foreign against her skin after the rough, standard-issue prison uniform. They smelled of detergent and anonymity. She was free. The word echoed in her mind, but it felt hollow, disconnected from reality. Was anyone who had been through what she had ever truly free? The trauma of her illness, the bone-deep betrayal of Harmony's lies, the visceral terror of the fight that had ended her mother's life, these things had carved grooves into her soul that a simple release form could not erase. She was free from the physical bars of Pentonville, but the prison of her memories had come with her. The door opened, and for a heart-stopping second, she feared it was a mistake, that a guard would come in to tell her it was all a clerical error. But it was Michael who stepped through, his face a canvas of such raw, unvarnished emotion that it stole the air from her lungs. There was love, so profound it was almost painful to look at. There was relief, a tidal wave of it that seemed to weaken his knees. And there was a lingering shadow of the agony they had both endured during their separation. Willow, he breathed, her name a prayer on his lips. And then she was in his arms. It wasn't a gentle embrace, it was a collision, a desperate clinging of two souls who had been forcibly torn apart. She buried her face in the familiar scent of his neck, her hands fisting in the fabric of his jacket as sobs racked her body. They were not just tears of joy, but of release, of pent-up fear, of grief for the time lost, for the pain they had both suffered. "You're here," she choked out, the words muffled against his shoulder. "You're really here." "I'm here," he whispered, his own voice thick with tears. He held her as if he were afraid she would vanish, his hands moving over her back, her hair, reassuring himself that she was solid, she was real, she was his. "It's over, Willow. You're coming home. The kids, they're waiting for you." The kids. Wiley and the baby she had barely gotten to know before her world had shattered. The thought of holding them, of reading to Wiley, of feeling her infant daughter's weight in her arms again, sent a fresh wave of emotion through her. That was freedom. Not the sterile room, not the signed documents, but the promise of her children's laughter, the warmth of their small bodies, the mundane, beautiful chaos of her family. They pulled apart slightly, just enough to look at each other. Michael cradled her face in his hands, his thumbs wiping away her tears. "I love you," he said, the words simple and absolute. "Nothing else matters. We are never letting you go again." As they walked out, hand in hand, into the bright, ordinary light of the hospital corridor, Willow braced herself. She expected the flash of cameras, the shouted questions from reporters, the invasive glare of public scrutiny that had followed her trial. But the hallway was quiet, empty save for a few hospital staff going about their business. There was no media circus, no frenzy. It was a gift, a small, profound mercy that allowed this fragile, precious moment to remain theirs and theirs alone. She didn't know who to thank for it, but the quiet peace of it settled something deep inside her, a first, tentative step toward healing. The walk back to General Hospital felt longer than the walk away from it. Each step Drew took was a conscious act of will, a march toward a reckoning he both dreaded and knew was necessary. The automatic doors hissed open, and the familiar scent of antiseptic washed over him again. This time, he did not let it choke him. He walked with purpose, his back straight, his gaze fixed ahead. He found them in the same waiting room. The scene was calmer now, the initial panic having subsided into a weary, watchful quiet. Olivia was speaking softly to a doctor, Brooklyn was scrolling through her phone, her body still tense with worry. And Lois. Lois was sitting alone in a corner chair, her arms wrapped around herself, staring out the window at the gathering dusk. She turned as he approached, her expression unreadable. There was no anger in her eyes, only a deep, weary sadness that cut him more deeply than any fury could have. Before she could speak, he did. "I am so sorry, Lois," he said, his voice low but clear, carrying across the quiet room. "Leaving it was cowardly and selfish. There is no excuse for it. The guilt, the fear, it overwhelmed me, and I failed you. I failed everyone when you needed me most. I am so sorry." The room fell completely silent. Brooklyn looked up from her phone, her expression shifting from worry to surprise. Olivia turned from the doctor, her gaze settling on Drew, assessing him. Lois studied his face for a long moment, seeing the genuine remorse, the shame, the renewed resolve. She let out a slow breath, the tension in her shoulders easing just a fraction. "We were worried about you, Drew," she said softly. "We're all falling apart here. We need to be together." "I know," he said, taking a tentative step forward. "And I'm here now. I'm not going anywhere. Whatever happens, whatever Ned needs, whatever this family needs, I'm here. I promise." He didn't ask for forgiveness. He simply stated his presence, his commitment. It was a start. Lois gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, and that was enough. It was an acknowledgement, a crack in the ice. He moved to sit beside her, not touching her yet, but simply sharing the space, sharing the burden. He had returned to the fight. 2 stories, 2 journeys, converged in the sprawling, complex ecosystem of Port Charles, their rhythms momentarily syncing in the hushed corridors of the same hospital. In the ICU, Ned Quartermain fought his silent, internal battle for life, a monitor beeping the steady, fragile rhythm of his heart, his family a fractured but present circle of hope and fear around him. A few floors away, in a private room, a different kind of healing was beginning. Willow was surrounded by the tangible proof of her freedom. Michael was a constant, solid presence at her side. Her son Wiley was curled up next to her on the bed, chattering a mile a minute, filling her in on everything she had missed, his small body a warm, vibrant anchor to the world she had lost. Her mother, the woman who had raised her, was there, tears of joy streaming down her face as she fussed with the blankets. And in her arms, Willow held her baby daughter, the infant cooing softly, her tiny fingers wrapping around Willow's thumb with an instinctual, trusting grip. In this room, the air was different. It was thick with love, with relief, with the profound, quiet joy of a family being stitched back together, one tender moment at a time. Downstairs, Drew Kane sat in the waiting room, the guilt still a cold stone in his gut, but no longer a crushing weight. He had come back. He had faced the people he had wronged. The path to redemption would be long, and the shadow of Ned's condition would loom over every step, but he had taken the first one. He had chosen to stay. And in his office at the Invader, Harrison Chase looked at the blank screen of his computer, the story of Willow's release still unwritten. He had chosen humanity over headlines, loyalty over a scoop. It was a small, quiet victory in a world that often prized noise over nuance, a single, deliberate act of kindness in the turbulent current of the city's endless dramas. Outside, the sun began to set over Port Charles, casting long, dramatic shadows between the buildings. The city breathed on, indifferent to the individual heartbreaks and triumphs unfolding within its grasp. Lives had been irrevocably altered in the span of a single afternoon. Some were walking back toward the light, grasping for redemption and reunion. Others were just beginning a long, uncertain vigil in the dark. But for now, in the quiet hum of the hospital, there was only the waiting, the hoping, and the fragile, enduring strength of the human heart, forever tested, forever trying to find its way home.